So where were we? Embodiment, cognitive mechanisms, beliefs, all this. Such questions started off, I suppose, in antiquity, but really it was the 40s when sciences like neurology, psychoanalysis, linguistics, these fields were separate and distinct subjects of investigation. And as I've alluded to and where we're going, these sciences form a cross-matrix of interdisciplinary study known as cognitive science. And this includes all this shit about science, models, stats, maths, philosophy, morals, ethics, linguistics, neurology, anthropology, philosophy, models of mind and artificial intelligence. There's also self-referential things to be mindful of and also kind of meta questions. So the very act of self-analysing changes that which is analysed. So you can never reach a conclusion because the act of looking changes it in specific case of when self-analyses self. And I don't mean this in some quantum woo-woo misunderstanding that, oh wow, looking at something changes it. I mean in the very specific instance of self-examination with a discerning eye. And when I say I mean in both senses of EYE and in the letter I. Assume which is most uncomfortable. And I say to be uncomfortable since it's a caution. Everyday life is being transformed by these new models of AI and sophisticated so-called thinking machines, even more so than the great books on philosophy and social theorists or therapists. Especially then, technology, driven by science, is the predominant dictator of change. Well, sure, you can choose not to use it. There is costs on doing that. There's costs on both sides. There's cost of not using science when it's available to us, getting left behind, and the cost of research and development and the endeavour of science itself. So what I'm saying is things like the mobile phone and search engines have impacted more lives in more ways than any book on philosophy, though I can't tell if this changes for the better. You know, I'm kind of tempted to think back to this myth of the 1950s where there was only 1.25 billion stupid people, if we're reckoning on half of the population being stupid. I mean, you know, but anyway, now, just in sheer numbers, what I'm trying to say is that the IQ, by definition, is, you know, made or calibrated, normalized, so that 100 is the average of everyone's IQ. And IQs have been going up. People are getting smarter, so they renormalize the table so that the average is always 100. And if you think about how stupid the average person is, and then realize that by definition half the population is worse than that. So I'm trying to round up and say if the world population in the 1950s was 2.5 billion and half of them were stupid, that's 1.25 billion stupid people. Now we've got approaching 9 billion on the planet, we're reaching 4 billion stupid people. That's a lot of damage. Anyway, yeah, insert poor taste eugenics joke. And we can see how it happens. People do get ideas about these kinds of things. A gross mislabeling and attribution of half the world population into a simplistic framework, like we've just done. And then we argue the cost of stupid people and how much stupid people hold us back. And this, it can be claimed, can be proved to be true, and so have grounds to do something about that half of the population. Yes, the better answer is one that is complicated, requires a lot of effort, takes longer and costs more. Educate the people, you know, take greater care and emphasis on doing such things, kind of the point I'm making. It's, of course, very easy to create a narrative and say we should genetically test people for intelligence, whatever that is, and then, you know, instigate some kind of eugenics program. It's an easy one to say, and it's easy to kill people, but it's too superficial. It doesn't challenge us in any meaningful way. Plus, also, it's morally reprehensible. Herein lies a bit of a dilemma, though, and perhaps is a small contributor, one among many, with a current dissatisfaction of life. I mean, I know we're going through the global pandemic right now, and it's awkward and difficult and horrible for a lot of people. Before this came along, though, there was commentary about how people are feeling more isolated. And, you know, the powerful, say, for example, Congress creatures or Parliament persons are not apparently listening. You know, this is further exemplified on the other side by big tech companies like YouTube, which are supposed to, you know, democratize free speech. Twitter and YouTube can't possibly respond individually to their billion of users. And so stock, automated, bot-driven, AI-fueled responses give non-committal, non-specific and often useless communication. It's very frustrating. And I've spent far too much time on the YouTube, certainly, and I read the comments a lot, and on Facebook, and I've noticed something. People just want to get noticed. People want to put forward that they are educated, and in some of the more nuanced YouTube channels that are very specific, they're not general chit-chat channels, they're very specific about certain subjects. People chip in the chat and in the comments with their knowledge of the subject. It's like they make a statement about, oh, this is the fact of the matter. Oh, so-and-so said this in 1842, quoted from so-and-so book. So the little snippets of information. And I get that people don't want to type out essays on YouTube. I mean, I've had to break comments up on YouTube into 4 comments because of the limit at 9,000 characters. So yeah, I've written, 30,000 character responses sometimes. No one reads them, I'm sure. But there's no engagement. I've actually found going into these chats and going into these streamers in the live chats, and I'll tag people and ask them a direct question about something they wrote. And people seem glad to be asked about their knowledge. But what happens in static chat is that it's just one line of facts or one piece of information. Or if it's someone trying to be clever and, there's a thing that happened that we've all seen before, we get all the standard responses. We get all the old jokes and we get all the old one-liners, and you think these are all the same. It's like people think it might be new to them and it might be clever to them and they might think it's funny, but it's been said 1,000 times by 1,000 different people. So once you realise that, you think, what's the point in leaving comments? It's all been said before. The only thing that I can see of worthwhile is to engage with people, to ask them, tell me more about that. Where did you learn that from? Why did you pick that subject to study? How did you get into this? But I'm too superficial, because even asking those questions, I'm not really interested. I'm just there just to make people feel appreciated or to engage with them. And it's kind of wasting their time because the conversation won't go anywhere because I'm not really interested. It's really weird. So what's often lacking, even, from the AI and the bot responses, and especially in sales and interpersonal communication through things like Twitter, where you're working with a very reduced number of channels. You can only read the text. You can't get the tone. You can't get the emphasis on words. There's no analogical markings. There's no tone or cadence to it. There's no body language associated with it. So it's very dry and impoverished. And in the least, I think empathy is missing. It's frustrating. We build these amazingly powerful tools like YouTube, Twitter, and by their nature become individually inaccessible as their size grows. Same with small YouTubers that I've started to follow and watch. They'll have, say, 50 concurrent watchers on their stream, and you can ask questions and engage, and you'll get a response in the chat, or they'll see your message and they'll respond to it, or they'll answer the question, or they'll interact. But once they get to about 1,000 current viewers on their live stream, the text just scrolls up so fast they can't even read it. So then you're just like, oh, well, I'm just watching their stream of consciousness. There's no interaction here, so let me find another small YouTuber. And then you just end up hopping from one to the next, and you think, well, I can see how this next one's going to go. When they get a little bit of traction, they're going to get, 15,000 followers. They're going to have 1,000 people or so watching their streams. They're not going to be able to interact. It's hit and miss as to whether they do, because everyone else is asking questions, and they're not going to move on to the next one. And so it becomes a transient experience. And you just think, well, this ultimately, I can hang around here for a couple of months, and then when they get big, I'll be able to move on again. So why bother in the first place? Fragmentation and dysfunction is the function. I'm wondering now if this isn't some kind of, when people who say this, the commentary is, fragmentation and dysfunction is the function. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's the way that it is. I'm wondering if this isn't some kind of capitalist excuse along the lines of management by exception. This project would have worked except for regulation. It would have worked except for we had no customers. It would have worked except for fragmentation. I don't know. Flip side of the coin, as the big tech companies close accounts for TOS violations, smaller platforms start, and then they churn, and then this churning is the new norm. We've seen this as people get kicked off YouTube or kicked off Twitter. They go to BitChute, or they go to Gab, or they go to Parler, and then Parler gets closed down because it just ends up being a far-right fash pit, and then they get sued, or their commercial risk becomes too big, or like the Amazons don't want to host the service because they may be liable. So then they get closed down and people find a new platform, and then it's the same old cycle again. So there seems to be a divide here that these entities and institutions have grown almost as a complete entity into themselves, so far removed now from everyday lives of those who created them, of those who initially used them. It's like the old castles or the stately homes. Sure, beautiful, amazing architecture, fabulous, stood the test of time, built to last, built on slave labour, and now impossibly expensive to maintain and repair, and all for the purposes of them just being more or less empty vessels, things to look at, rather than facilitating experience or having any utility above an aesthetic, adornments of the past rather than shelter and living space. Dysfunction is the function. Some have warned that the divide between the everyday experience and the scientific conceptions will drift so wide as to eventually become irreconcilable. In this statement, it's what I'm trying to get at. Morals, ethics, statistics, models of things, knowledge, science, philosophy, and empathy and communication. I'm trying to somehow ground it all, but I suspect it's a little bit beyond me. And at the back of my mind, is a theme of war and conflict where the abstract becomes of more importance than the quality of life itself. We have to win justice at any cost. The cost is human lives, but that's measurable and profound. But this justice thing is so abstract. And sometimes I think this is where we've lost dignity for human life and instead cash it out for currency. Again, another abstraction. I see a little bit of conflict there. There's a little bit of contradiction. I confess I'm fascinated by the ingenuity and innovations in the arms trade, yet wonder how different the world might be if we turned that creativity to inclusive matters rather than exclusionary ones. It's definitely a power thing, and here I have to check myself, and I'm realising a little bit I'm going down the wrong road, that I'm seeking a single saviour type too, when the solution is, of course, collective or social or community. Just don't mention communism. And that's probably why it's a bit of a dirty word, because those in power realised that if there was communism, it would by definition mean that those power hierarchies are very much flattened, not so much control over people's decisions then. And then, like anything else, they just attach an emotional payload to the word communism, and then people don't even understand what communism is anymore, but they know just to fear it because it's the bogeyman, it's that Soviet crap, it's whatever. We didn't create the world, but we were born into it. We did not design it, but we are constrained by its designs, if you like. We are awake to it and awake to ourselves. We live, we grow, and experience both, and from time to time reflect upon these things. Critically, it's our structure that enables us to reflect upon those things. It's in this reflection, and we see the reflection of the reflection reflecting back. We can't be outside of this, yet at the same time we are in a world that existed before reflection was available. We are not separate from it. This is, all that Persig stuff, and the question of who watches the watcher and who is the eye behind the eye that sees. Again, a nice ambiguity, and this is conflated with that kind of woo-woo crap that the mind creates the reality. The question being asked is, can we objectively observe ourselves without subjective interference? And this is what I'm saying about it being like a self-referential problem, a kind of meta problem that we can't escape. It requires a leap of abstraction. So an example, a simple one would be, is this a question? The best response I've seen to that is only if this is an answer. The response is of the same structure of thinking, it's the same level of abstraction, but it doesn't, does it answer the question? Does it answer the question in the sense, was a question even asked? You see what I'm getting at? It's between the lines, it's between the words, it's kind of the world, in the world, but you can't escape, when you try and resolve those kind of questions. They kind of like have a self-referential meta about them. So it's like Rick says from Rick and Morty, best not to think about it too much. Problems of existentialism and all that. Never mind all that rubbish, just pass the butter, and welcome to the club. Actually, while I'm at it, this philosophy, as you probably noticed, leads to particular therapeutic models such as ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, for example. based, I suspect, partly on linguistics and other philosophy, and especially, I think, on Camus, who had the insight, based upon the legend of Sisyphus, the dude pushing the rock up the hill, only for it to roll back down, a metaphor for life. Camus is known for his insights into what he called the absurd, that the universe and stuff has no inherent meaning, no purpose, it just rolls, often in the ways we don't want it to. Which is kind of an absurd way of looking at it, I suppose. Why is it that we insist that the rock be at the top of the hill? Why can't we just be content with it being at the bottom where it where it wants to be? Yeah. Sentient life, with its self-awareness, starts to ask, what is the meaning of it all? And it starts to move things around, apparently because clean-cut front lawns, manicured gardens, and the reorganisation of lowest entropy to nice square shapes of green grass, apparently, brings meaning. I'm sure there's art in it. Only the lawn needs cutting again next week, and we need a lawnmower, and then the means to buy one, and then a job, and, well, you see how absurd it gets, and especially when we don't have a fence around our property, the neighbours can see into it and then complain that you're not keeping up appearances, you're letting the neighbourhood down, or whatever the that means. So in a minute I'm going to get on to the axis of nihilism and absolutism, but here is another axis of tension, and I'm beginning to suspect where there is tension, there is anxiety. Well, it depends on what time horizon, value filter and perception we decide to use to resolve this anxiety. Camus shortlisted 3 options. Denial, which I take a moment to reference in contemporary time, recent events around the US Capitol storming, the denial of the alt-right and the GOP and Trump supporters. They just wouldn't accept that Trump had lost. It's weird. And pause for a moment for the implications of that. It means they've sunk their very meaning of life. They've pinned it to their God Emperor. And take a moment to pause and think of the sadness that such an impoverished mind must have, because it's only able to find meaning through an illusion, a God. Well, perhaps I'm too harsh. I'm still looking for meaning myself, and I've concluded there isn't one. And like I've commented about my friend who found flat earth and found God and religion, even though he knew it was rubbish, it brought him contentment. It brought him a set of answers that he could use as a foundation, even though it's shaky. And again, I have to express a certain sadness, is that if we're going to build tower blocks and skyscrapers and 50-bedroom mansions, then we ought to build them on solid foundations, because it needs to hold up a lot of weight. So to me, anybody who knowingly constructs weak and flimsy foundations, by definition almost can't have aspirations of building anything big, because if they know that the foundations are flimsy, they know that if they do try and create anything big, it's just going to collapse. So they know they're wasting their time, so the only way that they can resolve to make it make sense, in my mind anyway, is to limit as to what they build on those foundations, i.e. lived a very impoverished life, i.e. put their trust in the God Emperor, and then look what happens when it collapses. But perhaps there's a certain acceptance in this too, that they realise that the odds are stacked against them, it's difficult in life, and perhaps building big foundations with hopes of building skyscrapers and 50-bedroom mansions is only going to lead to a miserable life, because the chances of it happening are so remote that it's just going to be constant failure. Back to denial, I suppose. So my solution isn't great either. The other solution Camus thought was acceptance. Yeah, life is absurd. Get on with it. Own it. Push that rock up the hill, and when it falls down again, just look forward to pushing it up again. And that's the best you can do. So at least if you own the process and come to peace with it, then, well, if you've worked a 12-hour shift in a food factory doing a repetitive task, you may well have come to this conclusion and then owned the futility and absurdity. And in that process, it is possible to find enjoyment in the absurdity. This way, you're in on the joke. And while it doesn't materially change things, at least you can laugh at it, which is a way of bringing a perception of control. And it's this idea that Camus suggests. The third option. Yeah, the ultimate and last act of absolute control over one's destiny, and I'll leave that there. Denial, acceptance and self-termination are the options, and acceptance is the one recommended. I've done quite a bit of denial myself. Flitting between these seems to send one crazy. 1 minute everything seems under control, it's fine, and I can't tell whether that's acceptance or denial sometimes, or at least it brings a peace of mind. And then in the next, it's out of control, it's horrible, it's yucky, it's anxiety, and it's that kind of really weird feeling you get in your chest of existential dread. It's, coming up to your mid-60s and realising that you've just lost your pension because of events outside of your control, and you've downsized as much as you can tolerate, and now what? Well, you think you might go back to driving a truck for a living, but then you just read in the headlines today that haulage is down 68% because of Brexit, and so there's no demand for that skid anymore. Now what? Well, you think, I'm a good driver, maybe I'll get my Uber license, and then it's like $500 a month for the insurance, and everyone else is doing it, and you make pennies on the hour. Now what? Yes, it's absurd, and yes, it's very difficult to come to peace with that. Yeah, and I use that phrase because acceptance to me can also mean accepting the futility and accepting the only obvious conclusion. But we have to be cautious here on what exactly we're accepting. So I think a better phrase is coming to peace with. And the third option crosses one's mind from time to time. Doesn't help. Back in Rick and Morty land, Rick seems to sit between these. He kind of moves backwards and forwards. It's all shit. Good things can happen. And Rick's excessive use of technology enables him to explore these themes to an absurd degree. He even fights himself, which is surely meta commentary on all this. In the cartoon, there's a council of Ricks, but our Rick won't even join the council of Ricks because he's just, what's the expression they use now? It's not alpha male anymore, is it? It's sigma male. Technology, as I'm sure you've noticed, is an amplifier. And I guess this is the fuss over the speculated singularity event that's 5 years away, always was, always will be. And in this, the race is on. More knowledge. In fact, it's almost reached such an abstracted level already with AI, finding patterns in things that we didn't even know were there. And then we examine how the algorithm did it and analyse that. And that in of itself generates more knowledge. We're starting to see deep structures in things that were not apparent to us before. Maybe when I get back to the science and conflicts and beliefs series, I think I'm going to mention strange attractors in a few episodes' times. Anyway, this is, this pursuit of endless knowledge on knowledge, to extend the metaphor, is a very big mirror in which to look. We can certainly learn a lot about ourselves, which gives us better tools to ask better questions about ourselves, and so on. However, some problems are plain to see. Young kids, toddlers on the mobile devices, huge corporate empires valued in the billions that own no stock, have no inventory, have no warehouses, and employ no staff. Fantastic, I think. Sure, the road to riches and wealth. Institutional imperatives play a large part here. It's a crazy world of capital investing and incubators and what's the word I'm looking for? Early business accelerators, seed capital and all that. And also, the big platforms, as I was saying, gig workers, the gig economy that's now fueled by these platforms. And these gig workers are constantly bidding down their own value, work long and erratic, fragmented hours just to make ends meet, while said platform extracts hundreds of millions of labour hours at rock bottom prices. The fragmentation seems to lead to, in many cases, people having to compete below rock bottom prices just to get the social clout, recommendations or stars, as it were, such that potential buyers have enough trust to pay a rock bottom fee for a quality service. And it's the same on eBay, geared very much towards the buyer, and the sellers in many cases have to take the hits or risk a dink on their seller credit rating. I'm sometimes wondering that the buyer now has a disproportionate amount of power over, it's one thing to empower the buyers against huge corporations that have got all the lawyers and got all the accountants, got all the PR and got all the advertising. But to, pit that kind of power that we're handing back to the consumer against a gig worker. I mean, just look what's happened recently with Amazon agreeing to pay out, is it $80 million because they've been pinching or not forwarding the tips on some of their gig workers. unless we remember that some of these platforms, the fast food delivery platforms, the intermediaries, they take a 30% slice of profits from either the seller, it's out the seller, isn't it? And so the buyer either has to overpay, but of course competition means that the seller has to cut prices somewhere, and it's the poor delivery driver that's going to take that hit. We'll farm it out to a gig worker because they don't have to pay workers' insurance, they don't have to pay benefits, no unions to deal with, no sick pay. It's just a flood of anyone who will work for next to nothing on any given day. I remember this came up a few years ago when Uber came to London, and the black cab drivers understandably got quite upset. For those that don't know, it takes quite a long time to get certified to be able to hold one of those, what do they call them? What's the licenses the black cabs in London have? Is it the Hackney carriage license? Maybe I'm getting confused, but they have to do their time. They have to do the knowledge, as it's called, and that means pretty much knowing London street map, which is quite an undertaking. It takes a few years to do that. Obviously, sat-nav now, you don't need the knowledge. But one of the selling points that the black cab chaps, I think, missed was the fact that imagine, it's late at night and you're a young woman or a guy on his own or a little bit drunk, and you're a bit worried about the quality of service of a cab driver that's going to drive you 30 miles to your home out of town. Would you prefer a transient Uber driver, who this may be their first gig, or may have only got their license today and they are the lowest bidder? Or B, would you prefer the black cab qualified driver who's been doing it for a few years and has had to put considerable efforts into learning the knowledge and paying their quite high license fee, and who isn't going to ruin that investment of a few years worth of knowledge and lots of thousands of pounds for that license just to rob you of your purse tonight? So no, obviously the safer option, though slightly more expensive, and that's the quality of service you pay for, is to go with a black cab driver. But this is what grates me a little bit, is it's the same with the food industry, the restaurants and the TripAdvisors and all that, the self-appointed critiques and the self-appointed judges who go on TripAdvisor, and then they go around restaurants saying, I'm an influencer and I can leave you a bad review if you don't give me free food and all this crap. It's just picking on the little guy. It's exploiting the little guy. It's not like they're going up against McDonald's who are telling them to piss off. It's like small operations that are so tight on margins that are competing with McDonald's that give you a quality of service, a unique service. And these influencers and self-appointed food critics want to go there and just shit on them as though they're some fucking 5-star Michelin experienced high cuisine professional critique. And I found it the same as well. We're going to small restaurants, private, not chain, not franchised restaurants. The idea is you go in there and you're paying a lot of money to get good service because the price of the booze, the price of the food is 10 times what it costs at home, and you're not going to tell me that the quality is 10 times. So you're basically going in there to pay somebody to wipe your ass and tell you how good you are at picking wine and how discerning you are with picking certain dishes. So you're just paying someone to suck up to you. And I don't know why more people don't realise this. And then when the suck up isn't enough, we write a bad review when all along it was our instigation. And these bad reviews have a negative impact. Margins get squeezed, not enough customers turn up, so they have to put the price up, and then they have to start employing the waiters and the service staff at lower wage. So giving all these small one-man bands and small companies a harsh or low review doesn't help anyone. I mean, yeah, there are some shit pieces, but if it's that bad, complain to the local health authority, have them have a health check and get them taken out if they're that bad. But also, the tipping industry, oh God, I could go on about this, innit? Once upon a time, 5% was thanks. 10% was then, when was that? 80s, 10% came about to be about standard tipping. And then I noticed in the 90s, they started creeping up to the 15%. And then around about the 2000s, it was, you need to leave a little bit more than 15%. And now if you leave a 15% tip, you get the question, what was wrong with the service? It's like, nothing, you cheeky fuck. But it's because the employer is paying them shit. They're so reliant on tips that they're almost become gig workers in themselves. Again, I've commented before, it seems to me that the purpose of running a business is to get in a position where the success of the business means that you can forever increase the wages of the staff. If you're having to cut back and pay the staff less, you're doing it wrong. Oh boy, it just gets so complicated as well. I was learning about housing projects and, where you get the rich folk from the city going to the country and they buy up all the homes, and then people in Cotswolds who've actually lived there can't afford to buy the £5 million Cotswold cottage. Because all the city traders have snapped them all up, and that's, your entry level to a house in that region is £1 million. Well, if you were born and raised there, you just can't afford to buy a house there. So a lot of covenants are now being attached to land that's being developed that says only people from the local area can buy any houses that you build. And then you've got to look at, well, what's the average income in the area? Well, it's 25,000. Okay, well, that means that they could probably get $250,000 mortgage, and so the best I can build is a $200,000 house. That being the case, as a builder, if my profit margins say 10, 15 or even 20%, I'd rather make 20% on a $600,000 house than 20, 30% on a $175,000, $200,000 house. So, yeah, I'll go somewhere else. And then the thing doesn't get built. And then it just becomes, this is part of the housing crisis. It's one of those tragedy of the commons things that everyone's acting rationally, but no one gets houses. And so nothing happens. Again, it's an issue that never the twain shall meet. If I can put my money into, say, a Brazilian development, which was all the rage in the 2000s, or that Eastern European hotel that's just a knocking shop. Complicated stuff. Ethics, morals, money, profits. Yeah, so it's not just about the transaction, it's also the context in which the transactions are couched that delivers a meaning about things. Yeah, context covered that in the STFU series. Cognitive science, anyway, again, wandering. Cognitivism, the study of how the mind works and all that. This field arose as a response to behaviorists. Cognitivists argued that thinking was something else, and it was thinking that led to a particular behaviour. Cognitivism also rests on the notion that mind is a computational system. This seems to be the current prevailing view, though an area of current and very active research. Yet there is subtlety here to be looked at. It is not to say that the mind is software and the brain is the hardware, but it can be said that a successful simulation of mind, by whatever means, software and hardware, would be sufficient for the presence of an actual mind. Again, this analogy of a computer is more to do with computers in the strictest sense, as described by a Turing machine, and not necessarily anything to do with desktops or laptops, supercomputers, or what we'd normally think of as a computer. Many questions then, and I'm getting way sidetracked, but this is Searle's Chinese room. This is the one to look up. In this scenario, the person in the room is translating language according to rules, but has no idea of the meaning of the translation. It's purely computational, trades one symbol for another according to a rule book. The question lingering then is, where does meaning come from? Emergent something, symbols, connectionism, blah, blah, blah. Getting off track again. There are assumptions in this model, though, to do with how the world really is, how we internally represent the properties in the world, and that there is, in fact, a we that does all this. But you have to start somewhere. And this comes back to the idea that the internal representations and experience of the world are dictated by the specific instance of that we, be it human or otherwise, and the kinds of distinctions that we, the individual, the persons we're talking about, is able to make. And like I hinted already, it seems some are unable or just unwilling, which, as you may have spotted, delivers as a problem in that circle of reflection. Do we have the requisite distinctions required to figure out what mind is? It's an infinitely recurring, inquiring question. And if we knew what the answer was, then we would know the answer. According to the cognitivists, the problem to solve is showing a causal link between beliefs, desires, intentions and behaviours. This is a bit deep for me, but I understand this is explained with the model of symbolic computation, algebra, and the application of mathematics being the example where tokens are used and manipulated. So we can ask, if I have 2 baskets of 50 cherries, I know I have 100 cherries without actually having to execute the test of counting actual real cherries. The numeric symbols are representative of the thing, and the multiplication by 2 is also symbolic of the action of adding another basket of fungible contents. That's computation, as the old joke goes, no computation without representation. going a bit further, it's going back years to uni, semantics, syntax and lexical analysis. In the context of humans, these tokens or symbols also have semantic values. Over and above the token to which a process can be applied, there is an extra meaning which machines don't get. So, I don't know, think of the process of delivering foods, that we are one of those Uber Eats drivers, God forbid, or a truck driver, or, a UPS, FedEx driver. You're driving up there in a cab and the mobile device feeds you the next location and the package to drop off. So during the course of the day, you deliver these packages until there's just one remaining on the list of deliveries. The laptop or mobile device will say next drop location and show the package number. But as you know, this is the last drop. You don't actually need the package number of the item to be delivered. It's the only one, or the only ones left in the truck. It has to be. How do you know it's the last drop? Well, because there's only one package in the back of the van, or there is only one delivery showing up on the screen, one remaining delivery. The mobile device doesn't explicitly state last and final drop of the day, unless it's programmed to do so, in which case the programmer has syntactically coded this semantic meaning. This is the last one. Not just the next delivery, but the last one for the day. And the combination of knowing last drop, and that there is but one item remaining, or even many items, means that, as I say, these are all for the next address. The last drop also means that you can go home after the working day is coming to an end, and you can start to wind down and relax and think about other things. This is not apparent to machines. So there is a difference in use of phrase, next drop and last drop, because the last drop is another next drop, but it means that there isn't another next drop after this next drop. That's fairly clear to us, but what about more subtle ones like final stop and destination? Functionally the same, but there is a difference in meaning. Other examples are kill, murder, assassinate. Functionally the same, but, well, there are differences, and that's the connotation, the extra payload beyond literal and symbolic meaning. And semantics is the study of these kinds of relationships in symbols, tokens, and what they mean. Indeed, context is relevant to determining meaning. Maybe that's wandering off into pragmatics. However, the study of the meaning of words, phrases, and sentences is semantics. And if you've followed the channel, you will know I've mentioned neuro-linguistic programming from time to time. And as I understand it, is based on general semantics. In a therapeutic environment, or even one of the so-called life coaching environments, understanding meaning is what it's all about. The words, phrases, tone, pace, gestures, cadence, and spatial anchoring has meaning. The important bit is to enable the client to work out what that meaning is for them. Too many times I've seen the life coach presume to know what a facial gesture or body posture means. It's like, oh, I see you're folding your arms. That means that you're resistant to what I'm saying. No, it means something, but we don't know. We have to ask the client, hey, you folded your arms. What does that mean? Oh, it means I'm uncomfortable and I just want to fold my arms because that feels nicer. Okay, feels nicer than what? And then we can start to recover information about meaning. And what's actually important is the meaning for the client that they perhaps were unaware of, which seems to me to be the major issue in, say, sales or in life coaching, is that people get stuck with their understanding of the situation. A trite expression, but, problem well stated is a problem half solved. We've got to understand the problem. So sometimes people say, I'm stuck in life, and they can't explain it more than that because they lack the distinctions to be able to define it precisely so that solutions to those precise problems can be administered. So when someone says to you, I'm stuck in life, you might guess what that means, but maybe the client themselves don't even know what that means. They just recognize that they're not moving, they're stuck, they're in limbo, there's something not happening that they want to happen. And it strikes me that one of the patronizing questions that life coaches seem to ask is, well, what would get you unstuck? It's like, if they knew the answer to that question, they wouldn't be fucking stuck, would they? It's obvious that they don't know, and that's what I'm trying to get at, is they might not even know themselves. They don't have the distinctions. They don't have tools to resolve ambivalence. They haven't internally reflected on their own value hierarchy. They don't know what's important about their life. They don't know what's important in the context of their life. They haven't gone through that question set. They haven't developed the framework. And, doing a bit of armchair psychology, which I'm definitely not licensed to do, it seems that sometimes depression seems to be anchored here, that things People get depressed when the things they do don't mean anything, or the things they do don't bring any satisfaction or joy, or they can't find things that bring them joy anymore. They can't find things that they are eager to do. It's just all, yeah. And that seems to be able to sum it up. It's yeah. They can't express it. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. So semantics, it's how people convey their meaning, and I suspect how they convey meaning to themselves. And maybe I'll talk about this again in a minute or two when I mention submodalities. So just to get out a bit of jargon, there's two things to be aware of here. There's the denotation and the connotation. Denotations are factual and objective meanings. Connotations are the associated subjective meanings. Denotatively, it's cloudy and it's raining. Well, even cloudy there, it might be a bit subjective. Raining, we could definitely test for. Connotatively, we might say it's dull and fucking miserable outside. From that, we might guess that it's cold, wet and damp. Okay, a more global example. That bird is a dove. The connotation is inspired as freedom, or perhaps peace, or perhaps purity, or perhaps even releasing a dove as it flaps its wings skyward is a metaphor for releasing one's soul. Well, that's the thing, innit? We don't know. And then there are other matters within semantics. Firstly, semantic fields, which is where different words are said to belong in a semantic field if they are connected by a meaning. So think of drawing a heart, not an anatomical one, but the more beautiful and idyllic stylized one with an arrow through it, quite violent otherwise. Yet I don't have to tell you the colour of this drawn heart. Of course we know it's red. The colour of passions, the colour of hot blood coursing through the veins, the colour of blushing cheeks, the colour of making things throb and gorge and pulse. Okay, I'm pushing the semantic field of romance into something else now, but you see, the semantic field of romance has all these words that arouse that meaning. Figurative language, which includes things that we've mentioned before, metaphors, similes, idioms, lexems, convey meanings beyond their literal denotation. There's something more about them. I like phrases like, wrap your head around it. The image is just so confusing to me, but of course that's the challenge. To imagine such an impossible thing and then to come to terms with it in a way that makes sense with understanding. Wrapping your head around it. But as noted elsewhere, the cliches get played out. One that I just did, and like language, new terms emerge, old ones wane in and out of favour, and you can use, by listening to the metaphors that other people use, you can kind of pin their age, their sex, their gender, their demographic. You can really get a handle on someone, you fucking boomer. Yeah, even slang words have their epoch. That's why I really like languages like rhyming Cockney slang. It changes all the time, and you can tell someone what era they're from by what words of the rhyming slang. There was each decade seems to have its own flavour. It's very much a living language, and that's why it's difficult. You see a lot of YouTube channels that'll tell you, learn rhyming Cockney slang, but it's always out of date unless you live there. Semantics also is concerned with rhetorical devices, perhaps not anything about the truth, but nevertheless conveys some particular meaning that we want to get across. I've mentioned before Rhetorica ad Herennium and all the books on persuasion, analogies, hyperbole, allusions, synecdoche, metaphor, synecdoche, twice because I love that word. Let me give an example. The Pentagon. And a whole host of thoughts come to mind when merely I've mentioned a shape name, but not any shape, but the five-sided pentagon, but not any pentagon, but the Pentagon. And you will draw your own internal representations and associations. Indeed, corridors of power, military, blah, blah, blah. Other areas of related subjects include lexems, we've already mentioned in passing in regard to politeness theory, and denotation and connotation during the Francis Bacon episodes. Ambiguity, I've used those from time to time in these audios. Synonyms and antonyms also mentioned, and we did a chart of artful deviations in the current series, part 6, the science wars conflict series, around the 1 hour mark, 1 hour 8 minutes. There's a diagram there of artful deviations. So yeah, semantics, the study of meaning in language, big L language, which denotes the principles of human language and not a specific language. And linguistics is the study of human languages. And for completeness, the study of sounds in this context is phonetics, which also cracks me up. When you look at that word, how do you pronounce it? Phonetics, phonetics, it just looks weird. Yeah, phonetics, who'd have guessed? And, under form as well, we have form. There are the words and the phrases and clauses or sentences. And the study of the form of words is called morphology. And the study of phrases and clauses is called syntax. Meaning is studied by two branches of linguistics, semantics and pragmatics. Of course, it's possible to construct a sentence with correct grammar. And I don't mean grammar in terms of punctuation, but in specific regard to the rules of sounds and forms that can convey no meaning. For example, the colourless red distance dreamed about the perfectly circular square. Or we can talk about smelling the colour 9 when we're trying to understand people who are crazy in their behaviours. It's like watching Neil Breen's Twisted Pair films. I don't know whether you've seen those. A lot of YouTubers are talking about Neil Breen. His films, they have words, they have images, but what does it all mean? It's like some high concept perfume ad. I love the perfume ads at Christmas. They're great. They don't mean anything yet. They can mean anything. I think they're pretty good. I like them. Neil Breen films, crazy. What's it about? No one knows. Neil Breen in his films, he likes to make mention of the words computing, artificial intelligence and programming. These are recurring themes. Perhaps he has noticed a difference between syntax and semantics, and he has an inkling about technology and those who control it and the divide that it has the potential for creating. I think he's noticed it, but his films aren't quite articulate enough to get it across. The films are highly abstract, and he uses tropes a lot, rather badly, in such a way that the semantic payload is washed out. It's like a mashup of metaphors, like smelling the colour 9. What does that mean? It's just a blur. It's the difference that we made mention of last time between an in-focus photograph of mist and an out-of-focus photograph of, say, a pile of shattered glass. They look the same, but only one is a true rendition. Breen goes on about technology and has strong focus on hacking the truth and emphasising the corruption present within the large bureaucratic institutions of government and business. Business. 10x your business. Those who know. Perhaps he has a point though. Again, I make notice that the hacker trope is one of those single saviour types, a lone warrior with the ability to infiltrate a force or organisation many times as large, both in numbers of people and resources. Either such easily hacked corporations are inept, or the hacker is presented as a kind of godlike figure. I think Hollywood's really exaggerated the trope of the hacker. I remember when hacking was, in the late 70s, early 80s, hacking was really dumpster diving. A lot of systems just didn't have passwords back then, and those that did, you could get information to access systems by looking in the dumpster of the building you wanted to hack. You could find people's names, people's addresses, phone numbers, and, there's your way in. And one of the greatest crimes, I think if I remember it right, was Kevin Mitnick, who was put in jail for 30 years for hacking. It amounted to unauthorized access of a computer system. What did he do? He downloaded the operation manual for a telephone exchange. That was it. I don't know whether it's still in now or got out recently, but the penalties nowadays for unauthorized computer access are really stiff. Again, I kind of get a bit annoyed at this, that they make the penalties so high. It defeats the... if you don't want your data stolen, make your system secure. Done. It's no good whinging after the fact that someone's pinched your data and then moaning that they should be locked up for 10 years. If you didn't want it stolen in the first place, make it bloody secure. A couple of years ago, I looked into that Ashley Madison thing. No security there, really. Even their own internal auditors, programmers were saying this is not a secure system. And you can imagine, it caused a bit of a furore at the time because people looking for extramarital affairs, which is what Ashley Madison really was, and you go in there and you download the database and you find all these emails that are .gov. You've got government officials who you now know are playing on the side, and so you have leverage over government officials. So, it's just a dating site, but no, it isn't. Well, there you are. Same with Parler. That's been a riot. What a hoot. All the white nationalists, white supremacists, fascist Nazi boys post their horrible, wretched rhetoric on there. And from what I understand, when you sign up to Parler, you have to give over the equivalent to a national insurance number or a SIN. What do they call it over there? Anyway, you have to give over to prove your identity. So from that number, as it's a government-issued identification number, it's going to be so easy to cross-reference an address, and it's just a honeypot of white nationalists. Easy prosecutions should be anyway. But over there they have the First Amendment of free speech, so it's a bit more tricky to prosecute. Well, I don't know. That's a discussion for another day, isn't it? Where's the line drawn? Harm, I think, is where the line's drawn. So yeah, Neil Breen. Have a look on YouTube. Lots of people do videos on him. People take the piss out of him and his films that he makes because he relies or he emphasises the use of technology. But the technology he uses is all outdated. It's old mobile phones, it's old laptops, and you can see they're just a prop because they're never actually on. He's typing on the keyboard, but you only see the back of the laptop because it's an empty shell. It didn't actually work. And then he hangs satellite dishes out of the back of his old Mercedes car, and it does seem to make a point about it all, overemphasizes it, sticks circuit boards to his body to emphasize that he's like a cyborg. And it's cringe, but it's not necessarily important that the tech in the film is cutting edge, but it's been used as a metaphor. Maybe I'm projecting into this a little to appease, but we don't live for technology. Well, some of us do. Some of us do get really excited about 7nm microchip fabrication process over a 14nm process, but even there, it has purpose behind it. It's not done just for the sake of it, because it's fucking expensive, for one thing. People live because they like art and human relationships. Even that microprocessor chip design has an art to it. This is built in an expression of what it will mean. Again, it has meaning over the function of what it can mean for people, what it will mean, what it could mean for people. It's like getting chips down to the size that fits in a mobile device. All of a sudden, everyone's got a mobile phone, and that changes things in deep and profound ways. Or it's designing a CCD chip of such quality and structure that they produce the best dynamic range and color accuracy for digital cameras, such as the RE Alexa. Still, a camera that's just about 12 years old now and still considered the best that money can buy. And by the way, costing up to about fully loaded 200 grand each. And what these cameras do is the art. What these cameras do is enable people to make films, enable people to make art, capture or tell stories. I mean, think about it, spending $200,000 to buy a camera so that you can show somebody something. Wow. Yeah, and I think there's even more expensive versions that they don't actually sell. They'll only lease them to you for the duration of your project. Specialist stuff. So I think, we mentioned this before, art conveys human relationships. And so for me, critical analysis of media is to understand the fundamental enterprise of media production. All these film essays. It's all about the films that communicate and foster human relationships. And as we mentioned before film, it was plays and Shakespeare and why those were so popular, I imagine. We dipped our toe into this with the Francis Bacon and Robert Iger episodes. And I warned several times, I'm sure, that one of the 14 points on Umberto Eco's list of fascistic tendencies is the limitation on art and intellectualism, as the departed leader of the USA tried to do in limiting architecture of federal buildings to beautiful architecture, which of course is totally subjective, but that's not what he meant, I suspect. Again, the concern with the aesthetic. Should not federal buildings be mainly for utility of the people? Sure, if they're beautiful too, that's a bonus. But also, being public property, the question of expense on those beautifications has to be weighted against the public's more pressing needs. It seems crass to talk of concern of how $300, $400, $500 million or even billion-dollar buildings ought to look when millions of people are at risk of eviction under a collapsing economy from inept pandemic responses. There was even a local police force got ratioed on Twitter for showing off their $100,000 sport police car that will catch criminals. Who's on the roads right now? If you're in a region that's in lockdown right now, there's no traffic. There's no one to go after. And Conor McGregor showing off his $1 million watch that he just bought as the pandemic economic conditions has just about put half the globe on the verge of homelessness. That's really tone deaf. What a prick. Semantics can be coded for in the computer program. We can program shortcuts and kind of simulated meaning, like with the delivery driver's last drop. If there's only one item in the van, then that has to be the package to deliver, and after that stop, the meaning is that there are no packages to deliver, and we could code a robot delivery driver to go home after the last delivery, but we are then left with the residual problem of coding the robot to do the things when it gets home or returns to base. And there again is a semantic difference. Go home or return to base. There's a hidden additional meaning in those two phrases which are functionally the same. So when a human being goes home, it does all the things that are important to it. When a machine returns to base, now what? Well, you have to tell it. The residual problem of forever coding for the next instruction never ends. So to me, this is the perpetual problem of coding meaning with syntax. There's always one more step. You never seem to get to emergence of meaning. The spending time with the kids after a long work day isn't just a series of programmable steps. I mean, I suppose it could be, but it's overly complicated. There's so much to it. And there is something more in the semantic expression play with the kids rather than a sequence of instructions. And it's a different meaning all over again when a Catholic priest says plays with the kids. Anyway, gotta dig where you can. The claim is then that while it's not explicitly semantic, it is nevertheless present in syntax. I think this is what Neil Breen may have spotted, but Jesus, the egotistical positioning, it's hard to get over. Cyborg Space Jesus describes his character perfectly, but I don't know if he's realised that people are complex and rich with their distinctions. Yet he does inject concern into his films that AI and computers are black and white in nature and calculate only in absolutes. It simplifies things for sure, but also makes him a bit of an insufferable dickhead. The irony is, his solution, rather than say community education and distributed decision making, is that he will now decide what's best over and above the governments, corporations and AI, and since he is the supreme being, that's fine. Which just replaces one soporific power structure for another, yet in Breen's case, it is weaker since it has a single point of failure than, say, many individuals that make up a government, corporation or organisation. Some argue that a fully descriptive program is parallel to semantic meaning, and from that it can be derived that intelligence and intentionality are mechanically possible. I don't know if I'd agree. However, in the never-ending task of syntactically describing meaning, we are forced to make the distinction along the way. The distinction between, say, the deliveries and packages, the distinction between work time and home time, the distinction between playing with the kids and having a moment to educate the kids or rebuke them for bad behaviour, and all the other things, to us has meaning. To a machine, it's a series of instructions. And these machines can be very sophisticated and mimic very well human behaviour, in theory. Yet the uncanny valley remains. I suppose these are the big questions in cognitive science. Are machines really thinking with intention, or are humans actually deluded into thinking that they have free will and autonomous intention, and they are actually executing syntax rather than semantics? This highlights the previous problem. If the former, then examination of semantics is impossible as it isn't present. If the latter, how is subjectivism overcome to ensure the inquiry is not actually a delusion caused by our subjectivism? Would need a purely objective test which rules out subjective sensitivity. It's noted that the computer executes a program with the relevant instruction and syntax as provided by the programmer, who it is said of does have access to semantics. Yet we do not know how or if these semantics are coded, if at all, within the brain to sustain meaning. Obviously the answers to these questions are now the concern of AI and cognitive computing. AI is better described as the simulation of human senses, the simulation of human learning and processing, and the simulation of human responses. AI applications include problem solving, game playing, natural language processing, speech recognition, image processing, automatic programming, and robotics. Cognitive computing is better described as understanding and simulating reasoning and human behavior. Cognitive computing applications include also speech recognition, sentiment analysis, face detection, risk assessment, and fraud detection. So cognitive computing focuses on mimicking human behavior and reasoning to solve complex problems. Cognitive computing tries to replicate how humans would solve problems, while AI seeks to create new ways to solve problems that can potentially be better than human solutions. AI is not intended to mimic human thoughts and processes, but to solve a problem through the best possible algorithm. This is what I was saying before. They're finding relationships between things that humans have hitherto not seen. They're even finding novel solutions to chess games, that kind of thing. Cognitive computing is not responsible for making the decisions for humans. They simply supplement information for humans to make decisions. Anyway, getting off track again, so let me bring it back. Getting too off thing. This is supposed to be about beliefs, not quite on cognition yet, saving AI for later. So I wanted to come back to beliefs, and as noted previously, self, the person, the I, is often a nominalization, where a process has been solidified into a thing. Take, for example, the process of communicating. It's a doing word, and then we nominalize it into this thing called communication. And then we have an object, the communication, that we can talk about, improve, and then sell courses around. You wouldn't think to sell communicating, but you can sell communication devices, objects. Same with the person context, the ever-changing experience and ever-changing emotional responses. One of the easiest ways to demonstrate this is through priming and anchoring. So if you want to tell somebody some bad news, go up to the person that you're about to deliver the bad news to and say, shit, this is bad. It's going to cost a lot to put this right. And if we're lucky, we might get out just with a couple of broken legs and maybe a bankruptcy. And, if we're not so lucky, it could be prison time, but it might only be a short prison sentence. Let that sit and then say, yeah, actually, we just need $50 to fix it. Relief. Yeah, good. Here's 50. God, I don't want all that crap. It's a douche move, but there it is. We've installed two very different responses by contrasting meaning, and thus manipulated the emotional pull of great anxiety, which now can be raised or set right with the cheap cost of $50. Who wouldn't pay? Restaurants do this very well, or at least successful ones do. Imagine, if you will, a bottle of house wine, £10. It might be reasonable, even though you can get it from the supermarket for £6. Now I've set myself up for a fall since I've already anchored £10 as being reasonable in this example, but tried to bring balance by saying you can get it cheaper at the supermarket. Everyone knows this. But let's say you see the house wine on a menu for £20. Well, that's now a bit steep, because that £10 might have been reasonable and it's £5 in the supermarket. It's now like 4 times the price. But suppose that the menu is engineered. First on the wine list is some German or Italian or French named fine wine at £65 a bottle. Then just below it is the house wine at 20. Suddenly it starts to look reasonable again. This is contrasting, exaggerating distinctions by manipulating context. This is an easy example, but now consider a head of state doing this and antagonizing the divide and exaggerating the distinctions between, say, Democrats and Republicans. Even though Democrats at the moment are barely to the left of the Overton window, they're painted as radical leftists. Or, I can't even, in the drama of the United States political system right now, I'm struggling to think of one politician who would claim to be a socialist. I mean, even Bernie Sanders, I think, would say is a social democrat. AOC, well, maybe, I'm not sure. But there is no left in American politics. Yet, it's put in the minds of the electorate that if you vote for these Democrats, you're voting for left. And if you're voting left, you're ushering in communism. Communism is the end of your rights. Communism is taking all your guns away or something. Communism is taking away your free peaches. And then it's just, anchored, and people don't want those things to go. So yeah, we'll vote against the Democrats. That's how it works. Anchoring. So instead of focusing on doing good works and making excellent meals in those restaurants, if you like, literally, the proof being in the eating of a pudding, the success is engineered through manipulation of contrast and distinctions. So instead of raising the quality of the experience, they lower the benchmarks through anchoring. And it's not just restaurants that do this. It goes on all over. Governments, not picking on them particularly, but the new team gets elected and they change the way that things are measured from the last team, who also changed the way things were measured slightly from the last team, who had modified how they measure and report things slightly from the previous team. And after 5 or 6 generations, the benchmark is very different to what its original conception was, and it looks like change, maybe even improvement on paper, but you have to dig deep and look at what's actually being recorded and not what was being recorded in the first instance of the benchmark. Is this creating value, though? In fact, I was watching some scam channel on the YouTube that exposes the workings of phone scams. What's his name? Jim Browning, I think is his name. And there was a sad case where one elderly woman was duped out of 20 grand, and it was a frustrating phone call, and she knew that she was being duped, but the stress that it was causing her, and the confusion and the anguish, she said, "I know I'm being conned, just take the money and leave me alone. Just leave me alone. I don't care if the money's gone. I know I've been ripped off. I just want to let it go and forget about it because it's too stressful." And you got to think, wow, that's just crazy that, that's how much their peace of mind means to them. And you got to think, what does 20 grand mean? That's like, that's a year of sustenance. And, if you're retired, that's a lot to lose. Our experience is flux, though. This experience is subjective, relative, and contextual to situations. It's always situational. So if we can change people's perception of the situation, we can change their behaviours, because that's what they react to. It seems to be the rarest of occasions where the situation is not changing. Even the thoughts meandering through our daydreams change. It's cool, though, to daydream from time to time, even if it is about cyborg Christ Saviour Types, either through Neil Breen or through that new production company of the Daily Wire, whatever they're called. Ben Shapiro's shitty film Run, Hide, Fight or something. Run, Hide, Fire, about a single saviour Christ type, glorifying school shootings to make the point about it. It's just fucking mental. Even throughout this flux, though, we hold on to our identity quite well. We have a personality, memories and plans and hopes. Well, for some at least, these cohere to a foundation upon which all else is measured. How is this possible? I'm not so sure that it actually is, and I suspect that this foundation is in flux too, but that the mind normalises it all the time, so we don't notice. And it's summed up by the statement, I am as I am. And there, I is in constant flux. But the apparatus we would use to measure change also changes. A cynic, perhaps accurately, once noted, truth and fairness are variable, money is a constant. And his father had a rule that stated, the constant me is always greater than the variable you. If anything, then perhaps we measure a sense of the world in relation to a differential in our own change. In other words, it's like crossing that event horizon, or that point in a stream where we could not swim against the tide, but since we don't wish to, we don't notice that we've passed the point of no return and there's nothing we can do. We're going over the waterfall. It's just that we don't realise it yet. Because we change, the apparatus to measure the change is also changed, so we don't notice. Our minds become more sophisticated by the number of distinctions we are able to make, yet it is still us. I still am who I am. This is one of those sayings like, the map is the territory, and Frankenstein was a monster. Yes, but no, but actually, yes. It also has a profound interpretation, but it's a bit of a deepity as the consequences of this realisation are not actually profound. I also have an inkling that much like memory drift, we recalling, that introspection is like reading the words of the book, but not the sentences. Yeah, we can read the words, but the meaning wasn't captured. Likewise, many have said with genuine sincerity that they don't need to read the Bible to know what it says. Likewise, I suspect many will feel no need to introspect. They already know who they are. They already know that they know. I don't need to know who I am to know who I am. Or at least in the pigeonhole of memory, there exists a response to the question, who am I? How and when it got filled and by what means is never asked, let alone the content tested for accuracy. It's like trying to tickle yourself, you know it's coming, yet with a good joke there seems to be a transcendental phenomenon. Something new occurs to us in a novel and amusing way, and we laugh. But why? We already know of the things that the joke describes or relies upon as presupposed in the knowledge set of the joke listener. And now with the punchline, the listener identifies a new relation between these things that is previously not apparent in a way that's humorous. And so for a short while we can be amused. You know, we've connected some data, formed knowledge or gained insight through an amusing way. To some extent, I felt the same way with maths when I started getting the hang of it. New relationships become evident and it gives grounding or foundation upon which more distinctions can be made. I can see why discovering new things and reading books and all the other things can be addictive. It's this catching ourselves off guard. I'm thinking it's a little bit like the process of joke writing. If there was a formula, we could discover every joke that ever was and ever will be. We could do that by using a brute force method, trying every combination or going through the formula and writing out all the jokes. But then they wouldn't be funny. Actually, when I was younger, I thought comedians made their jokes up on the spot. I didn't realise they were well-rehearsed performances, repeated many times. When I cottoned on, I thought, wow, this isn't so much about the quality of the joke, but the quality of the performance of the comedian who has told the joke so many times. How do they tell the joke with continued enthusiasm as if they are saying it for the first time? They're almost as surprised as the audience is. Pacing and leading, part of the performance. And it took the allure off the humour, but emphasised the performance. And then I'm reminded about the old joke about the jail, where there's this insular population, don't get out so much, don't get to hear new jokes, and they just start to call out numbers to save time. 56, and everyone laughs. Someone else shouts, 72, and everyone laughs. And the new inmate has it explained that the jokes are told so often that they're now abbreviated and just have a joke number. So he tries his luck and says, 57. No one laughs. They ask his cellmate, what's wrong? What's wrong with the joke? Is it a bad joke? And cellmate says, no, nothing, mate. They've heard it before. Actually, the brute force attempt of discovering all the jokes reminds me there was this thought experiment to do with computation. If we note that a high definition image of, say, 1280 by 720 pixels, it's about 200,000 pixels, and say we have 1,000 colour, we have 16 million or whatever, but 1,000 distinguishable colours that we can assign each pixel for distinction. That's quite a lot of combinations, but it is theoretically possible to cycle through every combination. And when we have done creating them all, we would have a photograph or an image that describes the universe at all scales. Every plan, every blueprint, every technical instrument, every invention, every thought that could be written, or every combination of words and sentences that could be enumerated. It would contain the whole lot. And most of it would be junk, but something to do when we get quantum computing or something. So the point is that if we try and consciously catch ourselves, the I we seek is certainly elusive. At best, we can analyse a perception of ourselves, but not the actual self. So where or who is this I? At best, even here, I seems only to exist as a perception. Syntax and semantics, the ghost in the machine, as it were. The difference between syntax and semantics. The instruction and the meaning. The denotation and the connotation. Sartre expressed this by saying that we are condemned to a belief in the self. I think this also has gnarly implications insofar as if it's a belief about ourselves, and beliefs are those things that we've talked about before, causation, limits, and meaning, which is what we're talking about here. And these are functions of perception, and perception is so easily modified by outside external forces such as things like anchoring, priming, and rhetoric. Then again, if it's so easy to change people's perceptions about the belief about themselves, well, the implications are, it's home to abuse. And here it might be sensible to have a digression about transcendental meditation, Zen and all that, sure, but not now. Suffice to say, meditation seems a way of transcending the question of where do I go when I seek I in the reflection of introspection. As Rick says, best not to think about it, just be. But be what? Surely you have experienced at some time a threat to your identity, which is where I'm going to go in a minute. if I remember. But did you defend that identity or adapt to the stimulus and change in an instant and re-identify as something or someone new? If this is possible, then why should we defend an identity at all that we can't even find under examination? I find it strange. And I'll tell you the first example that I had of this. It wasn't so long ago, actually. Someone on Facebook posted a picture of Superman in a miniskirt. It was really weird. And if you follow the YouTubes, you'll have seen that philosophy tube Ollie is no longer with us, but Abigail announced her arrival. Same thing, very strange experience. So there's this guy on YouTube that talked about philosophy, and I listened to his content and consumed it in a way that I extended to this character and interaction. They say that when you read a book, you're actually having a conversation with the author, even those static words. We can get into, what does the author mean, and then there's all the question about the so-called death of the author theory. But because the video was presented by a guy, there's certain perceptions and presupposed notions that come with that presentation. You consume the content through a particular filter. This is a guy. I'm a guy. This is guys talking. Same with Superman. The ultimate macho hero, strongman, impervious, the ultimate alpha. And then someone puts him in a dress and you think, oh, that just shakes me. And you think, well, you might, and this is my point, is you might look at that, react and go, what knobhead would do that? That's disgusting, that's foul, that's denigrating an icon. Well, the question should be asking an internal reflection. Why does that shake my mind so much? Why am I so invested in protecting the image of a cartoon? Why am I so invested in protecting the image of a fictional character? What associations or attachments do I have here that are triggered so easily by drawing Superman in a miniskirt? And then when Philosophy Tube made the announcement that they are now transgender, trans woman, though some may have speculated and sussed it, and it was all a performance, there was the male character had a good year or two of doing his performances, and it was a performance. We didn't realise just how much of a performance, because the real person, if you like, behind it all was a woman. But when we see Ollie there with his light beard and moustache, deep voice, wearing male-coded clothes, he did the trans community, I think, an incredible service in the fact that he allowed, we're talking about he, when he was Ollie, when he presented as a he allowed the huge audience to get to know Ollie, the character Ollie, and associate and attach to it. And then when the break was made, and then the next video was made by Abigail, questions arise, and, it's the same kind of thing. Some people would have had an immediate reaction to it, like, oh, why has he suddenly started dressing in women's clothes? That's disgusting, despicable, I don't like it. But it's the same reaction to seeing Superman in a piece of clothing that's coded as female. Why does it upset you so much? What is it that's causing, mental distress that you can't just accept that this is now Abigail? What's the internal process going on that's making it that we're so attached that this person can't now be gender fluid and move into what they feel, know and describe and identify themselves as? If someone says that they feel this way, that they are this way, that they describe themselves this way and identify, who are we to say, no, mate, you're wrong? But yeah, it seems to shake us so much. And this is why I'm saying I think the Ollie character has done a massive service, because it's, I think, got so many people to raise this question in their own mind. It's like, oh yeah, okay, well, why has that shaken me so much? And then this whole question about identity, which was talking about a few minutes ago. How do we know to be ourselves? Who is ourselves? Where do we get our identity from? And how do we remember to present that identity when we meet an old friend? How do we know that our old friend, we kind of implicitly trust, hasn't changed totally? What measure of thing or stuff or faith, if you like, that we put in our relationship to extend it to the fact that we haven't seen this person in 10 years, but we're still going to believe that they are who they were the last time we met them 10 years ago? So what I'm saying, if I'm saying anything, is why are we so hard, fast and fixed and obsessed and fetishizing our identity anyway? So let's just run through a couple. When we are encroached upon and our personal space, which is an extension of identity, is invaded, we get uncomfortable to varying degrees. And you've seen the videos on YouTube, I'm sure, of guys being filmed in the street where a good-looking woman goes up to them and grabs their crotch, and the guys seem not to bother about it. And some then trying to make the point that, you'd be arrested or put in jail if a guy did this to a woman. Well, okay, but now imagine the same guy stood there in the street, and instead of an attractive woman coming up and grabbing him by the crotch, it's another bloke. Uncomfortable to varying degrees of personal space. A noise as well, unpredictable noise like traffic noise and late night party noise. Noise that's unpredictable and outside of our control pisses people off. When we think about self-enhancement and achieving gain, praise or fame, we get aroused to greed. And when we are coincident in circumstances that are totally irrelevant to us, we start to feel boredom. That friend going on about fucking whatever it was, I don't know, I can't remember because I wasn't listening. Are these impulses natural or learned responses? Some say natural. I say that excuses and relieves us of the possibility that actually we can be under control of such responses. And I suppose the inevitable and obvious question, what would happen if we didn't maintain this identity of self? Somehow, I can't help but be reminded of Deleuze's commentary on commerce, and in combination with the obsession to objectify and commoditize everything. When I think Deleuze was being cynical, I think he was also right, that any capitalist that discovers this and realizes that they have infinite ways to slice, dice and package anything to sell surely is their biggest aha moment. Is there something inherently important about maintaining identity? Do we do it deliberately, or is it a lowest cost type of thing from which a stable relationship with another community member can be established, which is when friendly primates start to excel? We're social creatures, I suppose. And I'm wondering as well now if identity, the fetish that we have with it, isn't actually a marketing device in of itself. Are you male? Are you single? Are you looking to get buff and go down the gym? Do you want to pick up attractive women? And are you in this age bracket? Are you the children high school jock? Then you need Magma Plus. I think we did this one before, didn't we? That the music industry exploits identity very well. Take the niche of metal music. Heavy metal arrived in the USA from Britain during the 70s. In this category, we find heavy metal, thrash metal, American death metal, black metal, hardcore, deathcore, glam metal, new metal, grindcore, death grind, old school thrash, thrashcore, black and death metal, melodic death metal, Viking metal, pirate metal, folk metal, then of course Norwegian metal, Norwegian black metal, Norwegian Christian metal, Norwegian death metal, Norwegian doom metal, Norwegian folk metal, Norwegian gothic metal, Norwegian power metal, Norwegian progressive metal, Norwegian symphonic, I knew I'd fuck it up, Norwegian symphonic metal, and Norwegian thrash, and many more since. In this age of celebritards, the messenger is as important as the message, and I forget who said the medium is the message, but that's what all this is. So at the top level, we may well like heavy metal. This description conveys a mere casual interest in heavy metal. As such, we don't identify particularly. If we declare our fanaticism of Belphegor, Austrian black and death metal band, we would be declaring a very specific interest. The niche is so narrow that like isn't a word that fans would use. It would more be a way of life. The identification to the brand would be strong. The look, the image, the sound, and the messages are aligned with mutual beliefs. That is to say, a devoted fan would say they speak the truth. The narrower the niche, the stronger the identification, and an attack on Belphegor is perceived as and perhaps even projected as an attack on the fans themselves. They'll feel it personally. Same with the Trump thing. When people are attacking Trump, I'm sure his devotees and fanatic supporters feel themselves attacked, not even by proxy, but directly. Much like when I saw that picture of Superman wearing a mini dress, for some strange reason, I felt a little bit more of a twinge than I'd like to admit of unease and discomfort, but I don't know why. It's the same thing that did the rounds last year when it was speculated that the next James Bond character would be a woman. No, James Bond is a man. No, Superman does not wear skirts. There seems to be a fanaticism, a fetish about it. It's maybe that secretly deep down we all desire or dream or fantasize one day that we will be that cyborg Christ supreme being, or that if fortune has its way with us, that there are circumstances and critical pathways that may actually lead to us being recruited into the Secret Service to be the next James Bond and given license to kill. And whilst James Bond is put out there with all these similar tropes and prototype beliefs that we identify with, we swallow the myth. So I think media and advertising has a little bit to answer for this, because they perpetuate these kinds of deep anchoring associations with archetypes. So, the Marlboro Man, well, again, I should do a video on the archetypes, but take any magazine or advertisement for a car from, I don't know, the 50s to the late 90s. It's the female form draped all over it, isn't it? Because the association's made. If you have this car, this comes with it. Again, with James Bond, if you are this type of man, these are all the things that come with it. So I'm wondering if deep down the association's strong enough to pull that through, in the sense that, we hope that one day we'll become James Bond, so we have all those things: international travel, immunity from prosecution, do what we like, a little bit of the action hero, and in the end, get the woman. And that's another thing, whilst I think about it, the nuclear family. Such anxiety about it. A relative once told me many, many years ago, where she lived, if you weren't married and had kids by the time you were 19, there was something wrong. It took me a long time to work out if that was a criticism or a prescription of the area. We've got to fit in. The anxiety of being ostracised in a society that profits from your self-doubt. Liking yourself is a rebellious act. But these stereotypes and associations trap us, because there's also the myth of the self-made millionaire. And I wonder sometimes if people vote against their own interests to support the super wealthy and the rich class, that if it was ever done to raise taxes to, say, 95%, that shatters my dream of becoming a millionaire, because by the time I get there, I'll have it all taxed anyway, so I better not vote for taxing the rich people to redistribute the wealth, in case that rare chance that I eventually become one of them. But put Superman in a dress, and those illusions are soon shattered. It's like it's taken away all those dreams and hopes, and it's like a reality check. Mate, you've anchored yourself to a myth, and just putting Superman in a dress shatters that myth, and it tells you how much that you've actually attached to a fantasy, to an illusion, and then it's suddenly, okay, I need something to replace this myth, and we start down that descent. We're starting to lose context. Our foundations of our perceptions are being challenged, but because they're so flimsy anyway, but nonetheless, they are our perceived foundations. But now, only when we see these things and get challenged like this, do we realise how shaky they actually are. And that's what I'm saying, that there's a fragility in that association. And we might realise that we've invested suddenly a lot of money in James Bond, and that we've gone to all his films, we've watched all the DVD sets, we've collected all the Blu-rays, and now something has just fractured our fanaticism, and it's the smallest thing. Maybe there was one James Bond that was written slightly sexually ambiguous, or hinted that maybe he had homosexual encounters in the past, or that's it, it's over. But at the same time, recognise that appeals to someone else. So no longer do music promoters shout and advertise, buy some metal music. They advertise directly to the niche in a very specific way, aiming to match their messages with the beliefs and values of the bands. They can identify the fans by where they shop, how they look, what clothes they wear, what age group they belong to, and, with all this AI stuff now, you only need to look at perhaps the Instagram feed, their Twitter feed, and who they have in their Twitter feeds as followers and followings, that you can perhaps nail their demographic just on those few data points. It's scary accurate. So the marketers can get very specific about the demographic, and this is why I realise that sometimes I think that the fetishization of identity is actually a useful tool for people who want to sell stuff, so they have a vested interest in keeping these identities alive. The tropes that we see in movies, the hero characters, the archetypes, and that's another thing we must do as well one day, the study of archetypes for marketing. The sage, the warrior, the lover, the regular guy, gal, the explorer, the wizard, the magician. I can't remember the others off the top of my head. Yeah, so instead of having, creating one band that appeals in a general way to millions of people, having 1,000 bands that appeal very deeply to the same millions, but split across different vertical groups means that 1,000 bands need to be managed, but the upshot is that the sub-genre that each band is identifying with, specifically with a few thousand people, is much stronger, and behaviour is more easily modified. Now, it's music, so it's relatively, I don't want to say harmless, but it's enriching. It's an enriching of life, of course. It's art, it's human experience, it's shared messages, it's storytelling. But also this technique can be applied and used by cults, religions, and Trumpisms. Yeah, this is what old Nietzsche was on about, that perhaps once upon a time religions provided an answer, a way of life. But this was obviously open to abuse by those who would self-enrich by proclaiming personally enriching interpretations of gospels and good books and sacred texts to people who at the time couldn't read, and thereby informing the ignorant masses of the way, very much like the right-wing evangelicals of today. Nietzsche famously said that the enlightened man had killed off God, and here I emphasise in the context, God is meant in the sense of a crutch, a human invention, and that enlightened man has surely no use of such toys anymore. Nietzsche also talked about integrity too, in a sense of having the fortitude to face one's own ignorance, not to accept it, but to remedy it. And every day we discover something else about which we are ignorant, and there is an opportunity to learn and be a bit less ignorant. So we're always going to be ignorant about something. It's a constant state of ignorance about things. And I think this is what was meant when Nietzsche talked about having the integrity of a warrior, to face down the challenge of becoming more enlightened every day through a discipline of thought, discipline of engagement, and having discipline to learn new stuff and practice, and to spar with others that have greater minds, wider experiences, and develop talents far beyond ours. In other words, it's up to us to take responsibility and figure out on our own, with discernment and careful consideration, what it's all about. The tropes, the myths and marketing identities seems to me are much like a religion, that they reinforce ideas about who we are, what group we belong to, and what that group is or isn't good at doing, supposedly. What is good or average behaviour for that group? I mean, gosh, we've seen how many times online when, I hate to bring a name up but say Kim Kardashian, she made her money by more or less being a model, and that's how she earned her money, fair dues. And then when she had kids, she carried on modelling and wearing the kind of clothes that was required for that job. But oh boy, did she get checked fast. Now you're the mother, you should, stand up to your responsibilities and dress accordingly. It's like, Jesus, wow. That just by having a child should determine you to change your ways and how you dress. Kind of logic's that, but it's again from a religion, from a fixed mindset, from a ceremony. And I suspect it harks back from, some tradition of, being off the market now and not dressing. So I don't want to say provocatively, but, if that's what she enjoyed and that's how she liked to dress and she liked the attention, then, more power to her. But that's the point, isn't it? Oh, more power to a woman with a child. We can't have that. She's spoken for. She's someone else's property now and should dress accordingly. It's just disgusting. No, not the way she dresses, that the people tell her the way to dress and to force these arcane ideas on people. That's disgusting. Yeah, so again, it's all constrained pathways, and if people act in predictable ways, it makes it easy to sell them stuff. So when we reinforce tropes and ideas and stereotypes and demographic groups, it's easier to define them then, and then say, you belong in that group, you belong in this group, and now that you're in those groups, this is how you ought to behave because you're one of those, you're a mother now, so you need to dress in these clothes, and conveniently we can sell you those clothes. So all this grouping and stuff, I can't help but wonder that it's all in aid of being sold something or being targeted for merch, and that you make someone else rich who's figured out what they want from you, from your life, your money, your labour. And so they persuade us to belong in these groups and then say, yeah, you're in this group now, you need these kind of shoes, or you need this kind of apparel, or, you need to buy this kind of watch, or you need to be seen in this kind of car, and And it did get me a little bit. I've never used a Macintosh. Have I used an Apple product? I think someone actually bought me quite a special gift once when the early Apple video players came out. They weren't like they were like video pod players. Yeah, I appreciated that gift. But earlier I'd had an MP3, a portable MP3 player. I went down the Rio route. I've still got it somewhere, and I used to put that on in the headphones, and then it'd sit comfortably underneath the motorcycle helmet, and I used to go belting across Ashdown Forest late at night on the old Honda Blackbird, doing all sorts of speeds that I won't mention. Statute of limitations probably don't apply. Those were the days. But I did have biker friends who had other fast bikes as well, and when they started families, it did become a point of contention that they ought to give up their biking days. And now I will grant there is a difference in risk in, choosing to wear provocative clothes, still being, while a mother, and having the rather riskier proposition of riding fast motorcycles, having just become a new father. One definitely has a higher risk profile than the other. And that's the thing, it's never your idea to have an accident. Anyway, story for another day. Yeah, I can't remember now why I wanted to bring up Apple. I never really got Apple, overpriced. Yeah, it could do a lot, but it was all superfluous to basic requirements. And, they go on about design and stuff. I remember at uni when the 286s and 386s were just starting to come in, and we had these Sun Spark workstations, which were pretty nifty bits of kit. And in the computing centre, it was mostly Sun workstations or 386s. And then round the corner, out of sight, was these Macintosh things, and it was also the Americans that went for the Macs, and I never got it. Small screen, clunky single button mouse, whereas on the Sun Spark workstations you had 2 or 3 button mice, which I found you could do more things more quickly with. But Mac found its place in desktop publishing, and they doubled down on that and made it a success. But this is the point, you're in one camp or the other, and you spend $1,200, £1,500 on a high-end PC or high-end Mac, and then you've got to defend that decision. So all of a sudden you've worked your way into being in one camp or the other. I always like PCs because I like to take them apart and change out the sound cards, change out the graphics cards, and put in bigger hard drives, more memory. I always got the impression that it wasn't so flexible with the Macs. And then there was that the Microsoft thing and the OS2 warp, and it all got a bit weird as NT tried to catch up. Yeah, the history of it all is very weird. And another dichotomy as well. Are you a red or green team? AMD or Nvidia? And at the start, I think Team Red, the ATIs, were technologically more advanced than Nvidia, but Nvidia had brilliant marketing. And now I think they're way ahead, certainly in the graphics. But that was due to them redefining the business cycles for graphics cards, which had a peculiarity insofar as the CPUs were being released approximately according to Moore's law every 18 months. There was a substantial enough improvement to warrant releasing new SKUs. But Nvidia looked at the graphics cards and said, that rule doesn't apply here. We can release a new graphics card every 2 or 3 months. Well, that has significant improvement on the last one. And so they did that. So we get these kind of camps that we start to defend, Apple versus Windows or the Wintel platform, Nvidia versus ATI or AMD, Ferrari versus Lamborghini, and Breitling versus Rolex wristwatches, but they're all shit. Go and buy yourself a nice Breguet. Nietzsche suggests more, though. He suggests to resist finding a final meaning, and this is what religions seem to offer. It takes the burden away of working out the consequences to all of our actions. It removes the need to evaluate life's purpose and meanings. Someone tells you what it is. Someone tells you what Jesus wants. Someone tells you what God's purpose is. And of course, there are many who will sell you a course to help you find your true life purpose. As I say, religions have their answers, but I suspect, as with other koans and meanings contained within paradoxes, and as trite as it sounds, the purpose of life is to find purpose in life. It's ridiculous, but it's in a way one of those meanings that's between the words. Yes, it's never ending, that's the point. It's dynamic, it's contextual, and the pursuit of it is folly. Nevertheless, Nietzsche suggests it requires integrity. Yes, it's difficult to do. Yes, it's tough. And it demands an inner strength and power, the ability to influence our own decisions over and above all those external powers trying to influence our decisions about, what pleasures this object will bring, or what envy others will have of you for having this thing, or, what group you ought to belong to because self-esteem or something. And through these material acquisitions, may you find happiness and value and purpose. I'm not sure that's how it works. So again, it's a battle of wills almost, taking responsibility for ourselves to decide what purpose and what's important to us, and then all the other stuff competing for our attention, for our money, by promising us things that persuade us to make decisions about what to believe and what to buy and where to be and how to be and who to be with, and in fact, very much who to be. So this kind of pursuit of purpose Nietzsche reckoned to be the path of life, and that it should lead to a greater and more refined distinctions about stuff that can be appreciated then in infinite ways. And that just makes the experience all the more rich. It's hard, and so many avoid this path, and they don't want to know who they are, nor the level of their ignorance, nor undertake the hard work of self-improvement or introspection. They build criticism shields, they hide behind my truth badges, and engage in subjectivism at best, that everyone is right according to their own belief about reality, which is incoherent and doesn't lead to change, because I might, in this mode of operation, I might disagree with somebody who thinks that murder's okay, but it's not up to me to change their mind about it because everybody's right according to their own moral code. So that's what I'm saying, it's just incoherent. And then they protect these interpretations and these illusions that they already have. They themselves don't change because, they're defending the illusion, which prohibits change because it's comfortable to have and it avoids the hard work and avoids this sudden, we talked about it before, the fall into the abyss, my life's been a lie. It's quite a big one to wake up to. And so I've noticed there are a lot of people in this group that can't even follow their illusions. They don't even have the discipline to stand by their own illusions. And so what they do instead is that they project their shame and guilt and inadequacy and failure onto others and seek to earn redemption by forcing these others to adhere to their illusions. So they force their illusions and myth onto other people, and then force these other people to do the actions that these illusions require. In some way, it seems to me, to win favour with their god or deity, insofar as that they might have failed to adhere to doctrine or dogma, but because they've now cajoled or forced 10 others, or converted 10 others, or convinced a dozen others to live by God's rule, to become disciples, this must somehow please God, and this somehow will win the person who's done this a pass. That why they failed to live as Jesus, for example, why they failed to do God's work on earth, they forced others to. So in the final tally, this should be accounted for in their final judgment. It seems wretched, but it seems to be out there. But this is the way of being born into sin and compelled to be good while given temptation to be evil. As the saying goes, the abused often become abusers themselves. I don't know, I think we covered the Manson thing, didn't we, where, Charles Manson had a weird way of restoring equity. If he was to have nothing, then it's only fair that everyone else has nothing, rather than try and lift himself up to the parity of others. He brought everyone down to where he was. So, I can see the hard right evangelical Christian saying my life sucked because I have to follow all these rules, and it doesn't mean it's not fair that you get away with doing what you want to do, so I've got to impose it on you. But going the path alone is not comfortable, and it's not as easy as blending with familiar ignorance. Here we're back to that room full of friendly faces, all enabling each other to pretend that they know something while maintaining the secret pact never to ask. So ever more outrageous claims and ideas never get checked, and it becomes a runaway train. And I think we're seeing a little bit of it in current politics, that the right wing just seems nuts and come out with crazy and crazier stuff every day. No one's holding them to check because, it's my truth. My freedom to impose my way of life on you, that kind of stupidity. And this leans back into what we said about ethics, that relying on someone else to tell us what to do isn't making an ethical decision, unless we have actually checked the working and concur. Not that we concur just because someone else said it, not concur just because an authority said it, but because we've read what they've said, analysed it for ourselves, and we have reached that conclusion also, and not because of them. We have to put our own effort into this consideration in some way. It may well be possible, for example, to read the Bible and all the good news, analyse it and critically agree with some of the rules and guidelines as to what is virtuous or ethical or utilitarian. However, saying something like, I don't need to read the Bible to know what it says, and then turn around and do behaviours that are horrible, and then justify it by the words of the good book, is clearly not thoughtful at all. It's not even ethical. It's a post hoc justification of apparently irrational behaviour. I suppose it's approximated to, I do this in God's name, therefore it's virtuous. Just invoking the name makes the behaviour okay, whatever that horrible thing is. Again, singling out the far-right evangelicals, that the good book approximates to doing good deeds, and the reasoning, therefore, is if I am a believer, if I hold the Bible to be true, then I'm a do-gooder. Therefore, anything I do is good and righteous. And this is, why I suspect Jan 6 insurrectionists were proud to show their faces and incriminate themselves. And all the more stupid, as at the time there was no better excuse to wear a mask in public to hide identity. So they obviously felt that they were not doing anything wrong. In fact, they were proud of doing this, what they believed to be right, because, well, it wasn't the Bible that they held up to be the word of God, but it was their God Emperor who they held up to be, But here they're caught in a double bind, because obviously if that can be proved, then there's obviously an incitement charge lingering. Anyway, this is why we can't have nice things. So yeah, why do we insist on protecting and hardening our identity and putting up these barriers to, that make attachment to things like Superman not wearing a dress so strong that we're prepared to fight people or get upset when people draw silly cartoons in Charlie Hebdo magazines? So I've wondered from time to time, for who is it that we maintain our identity? Ourselves, or for the utility of others? I wonder if, it's like wearing perfume, isn't it? Do we wear it for the sake of others, that they smell nice things, or do we wear fragrances for our own enjoyment? Or, do we do it such that others enjoy the smell so much that that experience of a pleasant and wonderful aroma becomes strongly associated with the wearer, and an unconscious association of attraction is made? Must look into the perfume industry. I suspect it's fascinating. Personally, I can say I've had experiences that have strongly linked a scent to the presence and actions of a partner at some time or other that's been more than enhanced by the light and glow of body sweat. And I'll leave that there. That's creepy as hell. But this is the point. It comes down to things that we mentioned earlier on about being attractive to people. And I don't mean the genetic gift of happen to having a bone structure that's currently in vogue. And again, I look at photos, it's startling. Different Facebook groups, you can have 60s groups, 70s groups, 80s groups, 90s groups, and a photography in different groups of models and people. It's almost as though you can see a change in the morphology. But of course it isn't. It's just that in the 60s, this style of body was in vogue. In the 70s, this style of body was in vogue. And in the 80s, this style of body was in vogue. So it's not that people have changed. It's just that the people we choose to photograph and put on a cover of magazines changes, and then everyone wants to look like them because they realise that people who are on magazines are obviously attractive, or else they wouldn't be on magazines, and then everyone wants to look like that to be attractive. And I don't mean this in a vain way, not necessarily just about aesthetics, but it's like people who give speeches that are humorous and compelling. We want to be around those people. We want to be around people who are attractive. We want to be around people who make us feel good, because it seems that we're so inept at doing it for ourselves. Again, the cult of personality, and we can talk about charisma, which again I think I've mentioned previously. I don't think it's actually a thing, and if there is such a thing as charisma, it's not in the person on stage. It's a gift that the audience bestows upon the speaker. They see something in the speaker that they want to see in the world, so they give these kind of strange properties and attributes to the speaker to encourage them to go forth and carry their message. And so the speaker gets away with so many things that normal mortals wouldn't, and we call that charisma, but it's not. It's actually a gift of the crowd. It's not something inherent in the speaker. It can certainly be worked and orchestrated to bring that about by process, semantics. Again, I mentioned the book, Weissman's book on discrimination by design. It seems to me that the emergent architecture, social interactions, buildings, the way railways and roads and everything like that, even the interior design of buildings, dictates our very way of life, and that steers our stereotypes and it steers our perceptions about things. It's a function of commerce. And I'll get back to this if I ever get to the Marxist critique of the dialectic. Crikey. In the meantime, suffice to say, we like predictability. Of course we do. Why? Because change is anxiety installing, it's stress. And like the woman who would rather lose 20 grand and be at peace with that rather than have a stress and anxiety of trying to recover that money, that's all unknown stuff. It's lawyers, it's talking to nasty people, and it's risk. And we don't like this because of the general lack of practice of handling the unknown. The parallel metaphor is the kids that are brought up in a sterile environment don't develop the immune system as well as those brought up who are exposed to a bit of dirt and grime. And I'm beginning to see also that the mind of a child insulated from distinctions and challenges is also stunted in development. Again, fucking religions, cults and flat earthers. Like I lamented of my ex-friend, the flat earther, the religion model provided him with an answer that made sense to him. In his response to my challenge, he was implicitly saying that his relativistic understanding of the world was met and satisfied by the simplistic model offered by religion and flat earth, and as such, he was content. It didn't matter that it was wrong, it just brought him peace of mind. In other words, he didn't want to bother himself finding out. Again, go back to that woman who lost 20 grand. He didn't want to put himself at risk of challenging his attachments to his beliefs. But he seemed to find comfort in not having to worry or have the anxiety about the unknown. He had found faith. So on the one hand, live in a sterile environment and you'll never get ill. However, get exposed to some filth and the immune system copes, and then we don't get ill to that exposure again. But if that person who's living in a sterile environment to never get ill again has to remain in a sterile environment. So approximately, yeah, it's more complicated, and I feel I have to emphasise that in the current context. Apparently, it seems maybe able to catch COVID again, but not carry the symptoms, but are still infectious. This is bad, and so it's a metaphor. Don't take it literally. Don't go out there and start infecting people just because you've had it. And while I'm commenting, the knock-on effect has been proven, has been disastrous. We could have nipped this global pandemic in the bud. But now, even as vaccines are coming out, which is fantastic news, and the response of the UK to, currently I think they're up to 12 million vaccinated in 3 weeks. Wow. That's not just developing a vaccine, it's also developing the logistics plan alongside it. But anyway, we're starting to hear now about mutations, which isn't great news. But there's also talk, I think I mentioned this in a couple of audios back, that combining vaccines might get up to the high 90s, high 90% of resistance, which is amazing. Yeah, it's all about risk. Banker likes to know their risk in lending, and now they're involving AI in the process so that they can analyse a history of you and your financial affairs, your situation, who you are linked with, and calculate all those risks. However, in this model, it assumes a predictability factor. And I suppose, like anything else, it'll work until it's proven not to, and then the model will be updated and it'll work again. However, I'm a bit cautious because I've heard it said in life, in the coaching circuit, how you do one thing is how you do all things. I strongly disagree, but this quip, I've learned, isn't actually an observation, but it's an insidious embedded command. It's a nefarious attempt to compel a controllable and predictable behaviour in the delegates. Sometimes I wonder if this is an imposition and it's a manifestation of the practitioner's anxiety. Instead of treating everybody as different individuals, it's much more convenient to treat them all the same, to wish that the audience has singularly predictable behaviour. So pre-framing it, how you do one thing is how you do all things. So then all he has to say is, remember that time when you were most excellent at your work? Well, that's how you should be here. It's putting people in boxes again so that they can be easily controlled. It's altering people's perception. It's using anchoring and framing to convince them that yes, how you do one thing is how you do all things. And then with that installed, all the practitioner has to do is trigger, one kind of behaviour from the past and then infer that that's how they ought to be now. Yeah, it's pretty shitty. I don't get along with it. Anyway, I've rambled enough, so we'll get on to the next part soon enough.